Imagine, if you will, a hypothetical world much like our own, but overseen by a mysterious cosmic entity. While our world's rich diversity of life arose naturally through sheer chance, here it would get a head start, thanks to the observer, with an introduced of a small selection of already evolved life forms from Earth. These introduced organisms would then be allowed to evolve entirely on their own, in complete isolation, for hundreds of millions of years, until their descendants resembled them barely at all. Now imagine if some of those colonists were highly specialized animals, which would never have the means to exploit as many varied niches anywhere else, due to competition from other species. Imagine an entire world where the only land animal present is a bird, a world without reptiles, amphibians, or mammals. It would be an experiment in natural selection on a scale never before seen. This is Serina, the world of birds. Serina is an ongoing, chronological world-building exercise and speculative evolution project that explores the natural history of a fictional terraformed moon, 2/3 the size of Earth, and orbiting a large gas giant in the habitable zone of an alternate solar system, populated only by a handful of organisms, including grasses, sunflowers, ants, crickets, guppies, and, most notably of all, a single terrestrial vertebrate, the domestic canary. Our journey to this strange world will take us from the very beginning, and then progress steadily along through the eons as the world's newly introduced life adapts to and evolves to suit its strange, new, and ever-changing environment. It would be here that the experiment by a powerful and distant creator would take shape. Left to its own devices for countless millennia, a magnificent new biosphere would form from the founding components into something incredible and new. It was to be a world truly for the birds, but not in a bad way. Somewhere in the distant reaches of the cosmos, a project was initiated on an incredible scale by an ancient entity of greater ability than anything humanity could comprehend. A large-scale evolutionary experiment on a never-before-seen scale, it would allow observation of the processes of evolution in an artificial, closed system from its beginning to its eventual end. A sterile rocky moon orbiting a large gas planet in a far-off solar system was utilized as a base, rendered habitable through the formation of an Earth-equivalent atmosphere, and stabilized into a rotating and slightly tilted orbit to closely replicate the familiar seasons and day-night cycle. Used as a template on which to observe the process, this moon was then seeded with living things, like an immense bioactive vivarium, and so let alone to develop, grow, and evolve. The primary subject of the closely controlled experiment was to be an animal small and adaptable, yet with unique constraints to its biology that would provide limits and restrictions on the ways it could evolve. A representative of a common animal group, but one whose full potential would likely never be realized in its native setting, among the many other competing species that formed the complex ecosystems of Earth. The world of Serina's focus would be the canary bird, a species of domesticated finch, and so a nod to the finches of the Galapagos Islands, which were pivotal in the formation of the theory of evolution. Here the birds would have no initial competitors, and so as they adapted to exploit every possible niche open to them, their evolution could lead them down paths otherwise unlikely. To survive, however, These introduced birds would require a modest number of partners to complete a web of life. Plants would be necessary to maintain the atmosphere and the carbon cycle, but to keep the initial ecosystem simplistic, plants suitable to the introduced canary's diet would form the majority of colonist species, with a few less edible land plants, such as bamboo, introduced to provide cover and habitat, which also partake in a fair amount of greens and a few insects for good measure. A wide variety of grasses and seed-bearing plants were vital to the foundation of the early canary-based ecosystem. A second need in crafting an ecosystem from the bare basics, though less immediately important to the birds themselves, were decomposers. Dead plant matter, droppings, and the bodies of deceased canaries would build up, and their nutrients remain locked up out of the environment without a healthy sampling of microfauna to break them down. Primarily to perform janitorial duty, detritivorous invertebrates such as earthworms, isopods, springtails, and mites, and scavengers such as ants, crickets, and beetles were vital to establish a healthy ecosystem. To keep the flowing waters of the New World healthy also required a number of their own introductions. Founded by various algae and elodia, both also incidentally edible to canaries, small crustaceans, snails, and worms also found a home. A small number of fish were included additionally, and would serve as an additional point of interest over time. Those introduced to Serina's waterways were all live-bearing, ray-finned fishes of the genera Xiphophorus and Poecilia, common in the pet trade under their common names as Pleiades, swordtails, guppies, and mollies. These fish would stabilize the aquatic environments out of reach of the canaries, feeding on the algae and controlling invertebrate populations. And though the project's focus would center upon the canary birds, especially at first, these secondary colonists would too go on to play their own important parts in the great story of Serina. Beginning with the most primitive of plants and algae, over several million years, the barren moon was gradually fitted with increasingly advanced organisms, building upon their earlier foundations, just as one might build up a towering skyscraper, creating an ever-increasingly complex system. Following the flora came the microscopic soil creatures, the nematodes, the worms, the vital detritivores. And then followed the invertebrates, the earthworms, the crickets, the shrimp, and the snails. As complexity increased with each class of creature, so too reduced the number of forms introduced. Thousands of plants, hundreds of insects, but only 7 species of vertebrates, only a single one of them terrestrial. It was this single creature, however, the last crowning introduction to the world, that would perhaps most impact it. Nothing would ever be the same again following the release of the canaries upon the verdantly awaiting, endless meadows of their new kingdom. When all was established and the last components in place, the experiment was then to be left alone, to continue on its own without further influence, but they which were responsible for it would always be watching its progress. The domestic canary, Serinus canaria domestica, chosen for Serina, was a human-bred cultivar of the wild Atlantic canary, a small passerine bird belonging to the genus Serinus in the finch family of Fringillidae. Once native to the Canary Islands, the Azores, and the Madeira of ancient Earth, these small birds became, following the 17th century, among the most commonplace of human house pets, with a captive range quickly coming to cover the whole of the planet as a result. Bred into forms carrying nearly any color of the rainbow, few, if any, would readapt to survive in the wild in a normal environment. Here, however, they find no predators. Food was abundant, enormously so. Life would be privileged for a time. But gradually, dynamics would begin to shift, as the silent and timeless processes of which the Creator so longed to observe would begin their work upon the birds, as well as their compatriots, the fishes, the invertebrates, and the plants with which they shared their new world. Evolution would carry on and work quickly to reshape the colonists to the environments of their new world. From these few founding creatures, one day would a world of strange and wonderful life grow and develop. The following is a complete list of Serina's originally imported macroscopic organisms. Not included are the innumerable soil bacteria and fungal organisms vital to a stable ecosystem, and the numbers of small invertebrates are approximate. Though Serina is most foremost the canvas for its namesake to claim, an ecology cannot subsist upon one bird alone, and a great variety of other creatures have also been introduced to the world to fulfill other ecological niches. Only once these were in place and a basic ecosystem established could the true subjects of the project be introduced and expected to thrive. Following the departure by its mysterious creators, this motley assortment of beasts and flora would have been utterly on their own, to live or to die, to adapt or to perish, to die out or diversify in a world all their own. Plants. Helianthus giganteus, the giant sunflower, was among the several species of the genus introduced to Serina. 300 plus grass species, including cereal grains and bamboo. Dandelion. Sunflowers, 30 plus species. Clovers, 120 plus species. Elodia canadensis. Liverworts, 1,000 plus species. Algae, 10,000 plus species. Moss, 1,000 plus species. Animals. Domestic canary, Serinus canaria domestica. Live-bearing zyvophorus fishes, Platias plus swordtails. And Poecilia fishes, guppies and mollies, a total of 7 species. Springtails, 1,000 plus species. Woodlice, or pillbugs, 100 plus species. Ants, 50 plus species. Aphids, 110 plus species. Millipedes, 200 plus species. Ladybird beetles, 10 species. Burying beetles, all of genus Nicrophorus. Crickets, 50 plus species of Gryllinae, or field crickets. Triops longicatus. Parthenogenic crayfish. Neocaridinae, or cherry shrimp. Copepods, 500 plus species. Hermit crabs, 100 plus species, marine. Mites, 10,000 plus species. Orbitadia, decomposing mites. Ornithonisus, parasitic biting mites. African giant land snail, Acatinidae, 5 species. Land slugs, 100 plus species. Sea slugs, 150 plus species. Bivalve mollusks, clams/mussels. 1,000 plus species of freshwater plus marine. Pond snails, 20 plus species. Whelks, 20 plus species. Hydra. Jellyfish, 100 plus species. Annelids, 1,000 plus species, including earthworms and aquatic detritivores. All of these organisms would contribute to the greater Serina ecosystem. Serina's atmosphere following the establishment of its ecosystem was very similar to Earth's, with oxygen at this time making up 24% of the atmosphere. The climate on the Moon during this era was more tropical than Earth's currently, and averaged roughly 70 degrees Fahrenheit, or 21 degrees Celsius. The temperature belts of the planet during this period were reduced in comparison to our own, and the tropics extended further both north and south. Only the northernmost and southernmost regions experienced prolonged temperatures below freezing, and unlike Earth, Serina at this time would have no permanent ice caps whatsoever. It would be a warm and mild garden world, ideally designed to accommodate its new children, as well as was possible during their establishment upon the world. Lasting from 0 to 10 million years post-establishment, this mild and prosperous era would come to be known as the Hypostecene, the Foundation Era. Serina at this time would be made up predominantly of a single supersized, winding supercontinent known as Cirrus, which would remain together for less than 20 million years before the Moon's high level of volcanism split them again. Composed of 5 individual landmasses connected by comparably thin land bridges, which run both north to south and east to west, in a wide arc across the majority of the Moon's face, these landmasses were known at this time as Ankiska, Storiata, Stevlandia, Walteria, and Kari. In theory, by walking across them, one could move, without ever crossing the sea, from one pole to the next, though the various landmasses would soon after this era be pulled into increasing isolation. For the eternity of this earliest and most important time span, they would remain attached, permitting a smooth colonization and migration of all introduced fauna to spread out and thrive. "100 centuries have amassed since the day the canaries were released onto their new world. Upwards of 7,000 generations of the songbirds have come and gone. In this time, their world has changed already in large ways. The explosion in diversity in the canary was almost instant. Without predators, their numbers exploded as each pair produced, with luck, 15 or more offspring each year. Food in the form of the seeds of grasses, shoots of flowering plants, and soft-bodied insects fueled an incredible population boom. Already a noticeable diversity of forms has arisen from the multicolored domestic bird imported here 10,000 years ago. Though almost all could likely reproduce with one another if situations required, few still do so given the choice, as one species has split into several hundred. Here on the plains of Ankiska, while plump, solitary individuals colored gray and white crack at the husks of a tall, clumping sunflower's almond-sized seeds, a small, brilliantly red bird gathers in small flocks to strip the shoots not of their seeds, but of the large, fat slugs that gather to rasp at the plant stalks, snapping them from their holdings with a beak already considerably longer and thinner than their ancestors. Hopping haphazardly through the undergrowth, a fumbling, quail-like specimen several times larger than either bird, hops awkwardly between the stems of grasses and clovers, nipping their tender buds and shoots. Were this 10-inch tall specimen still on Earth, she'd be utterly grounded, her wings having not grown with her body. Thanks to Serina's reduced gravity, she retains the ability to flutter sufficiently to perch in the flower's branches during the eternally twilight nights. But her nest is but a crude gathering of sticks set in plain sight upon the soil, their habitat all but lacking in trees or bushes and nest-raiding small animals. Among the very first habits among many canaries to develop would be the construction of the nest upon the bare ground. Until recently, this would have been as safe a place as ever, so long as the mother could guard her young from the occasional advances of ants. But already a nest robber is evolving. This hen returns from her forages to find her eggs destroyed, the shells crushed and the yolks lapped away. As the thief takes flight and dips down again just meters away in the tall grass, her pointed, downward curved bill is still sticky with her most recent meal. The egg-eating canary, however, has needs of her own to provide for, and has simply discovered a particularly nutritious meal to help her. Nothing is quite so good to help produce eggs than someone else's eggs. A time of naivety is coming to a close. No longer will everyone's young be so infallibly safe. Changes are occurring within habitats now, too. For the first time in its history, Serina is beginning to get its own forests. Within 100 years of colonization, isolated thickets of bamboo, the only native plants to somewhat keep a tree-like growth habit, initially seeded only in the 4 northern temperate zone, began to spread towards the equator. In a natural environment, the growth of these most grand of grasses is kept in check by the presence of other large shading plants. Without the influence of competition, their spread across Serina's sunny, nutrient-rich plains was unstifled. Within 500 years, tracts hundreds of miles in size have spread to reach southern Ankiska. Within 1,000 years, the plants had bridged the equator. Today, bamboo forests extend from pole to pole on every landmass, growing wherever sufficient moisture is present to allow their incredible natural growth rates of up to 34 inches per day. Without large herbivores to browse them, they are a boon to thousands of different insects and invertebrates. Without any competition for these resources, for a brief time it is the gastropod's time to shine. Growing up to 20 inches long and weighing close to 4 pounds, giant land snails become the largest land animals. Their days are numbered, however, as already their young begin to fall prey to the largest build of the ground canaries, which, having evolved their large crushing beaks for a wholly different purpose, begin to put them to other use and seek additional protein to supplement their seed-based diets. Never again will the gastropods flourish, as they will continue for the next 1,000,000 years, foraging at complete leisure in a world where carnivory has yet to catch up to the grazers. This is a brief, fleeting time of prosperity for the snails, but not one that may continue forever. In the waters of Serina, an even greater boom of diversity has been undergone in the live-bearing fishes introduced to a few inland freshwater habitats. Tens of thousands of generations of the fishes have spread across the globe wherever the seasonal rains and rivers could carry them. Without notable predators, they number in the tens of billions, filling every pond and river with life as they gather in shoals of thousands, picking at algae and small invertebrates, with only the occasional crayfish to fear. crayfish which, equally blessed by the supply of small fishes, may now weigh close to a pound. In the open sea, the guppies and swordtails have already adjusted to the high salinity, and for the first and only time in history, gather in swarms with little fear of active predators, in a sea eerily devoid of seabirds, sharks, or larger fishes. The largest sea creature at this time, and one of their only concerns, are the box jellyfish that may grow over 20 feet in length, ensnaring dozens of the tiny fishes each day, far more than they could eat, and making no dent in a still rising population. Moving like strange neon-colored ghosts, the sea slugs lurk below the action, enormous writhing beasts that now grow as large as a man's forearm. Similarly to distant land relatives, these mollusks experience their own brief dominion of the sea, browsing great swaths of coastal algae. One day, more significant predators will infiltrate this temporary marine Eden. But today, it is a land of plenty for all. Life is changing rapidly now upon Serina, as nature begins to try to balance out its artificial environment. The canaries have spread to all major landmasses and adapted to a great variety of diets. For the first time for its avian inhabitants, notable predators are beginning to emerge. Having moved from egg-eating to also include pilfering of nestlings, the hook-billed egg-eater canaries are experiencing a boom in diversity, having spread to most continents, moving further and further south as local birds become wise to their hunger and become increasingly intolerant. In the bamboo forests, the snails begin to decline following the evolution of Serina's first social, highly aggressive carnivores, the ants. Though only small and naturally docile ant species, predominantly though not wholly of genus Formica, were introduced to Serina, it took only 1 million years for them to significantly alter their behavior. Without predators or significant competition, it did not take long for docile omnivores to turn to hunting, pillaging the nests of Serina's hapless, ground-nesting birds. Their aggression grew, gathering in larger and larger swarms to overwhelm nestlings and eventually sitting mothers as well, desperate to protect their young. Their jaws became larger and more powerful as several species began to develop venomous stinging bites. The first wave of predators to hit Serina would be perhaps the worst: the empire ants. Growing up to an inch in length, these large-jawed, meat-eating insects become a terrible curse to the planet's large, defenseless gastropods, overwhelming them by the millions and dismembering them piece by piece, to carry a stock back to immense underground colonies composed of several hundred miles of subterranean tunnels. Within 10,000 years more, these most abnormally large snails will have been eaten all but to extinction, survived only by more reasonably sized forms, able to climb into the canopies to escape Serina's new apex predator. So too will be ravaged the unfortunate few large ground canaries to have totally forgotten how to fly in their brief era of prosperity. It is no longer safe to nest on the bare ground, and those birds which cannot quickly remember to place their nests above it or learn to fight off the hordes will soon lose out in this game of life, as their young are repeatedly destroyed by the world's new rulers. It is the ants which also now begin to take over the snail's role in the ecosystems. While the carnivorous formica ants pilfer the snails themselves, they open up a path for the leafcutter ants to quickly take their place. Soon there will be no forest glade free of their eternal harvesting, as tens of billions of ants begin to fulfill the roles normally filled by a few million large ungulates. Originating in the tropical belt, they will gradually move further both north and south to take over a niche otherwise all but empty, until vertebrate life catches up to them. Thus ends the era of the snail and begins the age of the ants. But neither too can this glut last forever. As the ants proliferate, so too do the number of creatures that begin to view them as a source of food. The first creatures to do so are the predatory mites, which begin to infest the nests of the insects, devouring their eggs and young. Soon, many creatures will follow suit, as Serina's ecology attempts to stabilize itself to reasonable boundaries. Serina's meadows at this time begin to explode with color as a handful of clover and sunflower species begin to speciate at a remarkable rate. Initially, both clades experienced a great drop in diversity, unable to compete with grasses and lacking natural insect pollinators. By now, however, a few surviving species of both have re-established in great numbers, pollinated now by either the wind, these plants being notable for significant atrophy of their petals, which became of little purpose, and others by unusual ants, which exhibit the peculiarity of retaining their wings throughout life. Like the leafcutters, these ants are entirely herbivorous, but they share a much closer relation to the empire ants, as belonging to genus Formica. Lacking the venomous stings or large mandibles of their relatives, the sweet-tasting honey ants become both a vital food source to many bird species. Their unique ability of flight, reversing an earlier trend towards flightlessness in the groups that began to pursue them, and a lifeline for Serina's flowers, now able to spread far and wide, taking their pollinators along, but which otherwise would have likely died out within the next few million years. Throughout damp regions worldwide, bamboo forests now climb to heights of over 130 feet. Below ground, a fertile soil has been taken over in the absence of moles by the invertebrates. Millipedes proliferate in the leaf litter of both meadow and bamboo glade, reaching lengths of half a meter or more. Also having taken to the soil are the crickets, which feed upon the plentiful starchy roots of the moon's plentiful grasses. Already they've begun to grow in absence of competition, with one species reaching a body length 4 inches long and the weight of a small rat. Growing up to 25 feet long, however, the Serenian bullworm of the deeper subsoil is now the longest terrestrial animal on the planet. In the sea, an evolutionary arms race has begun amongst the live-bearing fishes, as the largest individuals begin to specialize in preying upon the smaller. The largest fishes alive are now pelagic swordtails, over 12 inches in length, with males carrying elongated tail swords of equal length. Magnificent and colorful, they are free to take display to extreme lengths, lacking predators themselves, producing up to 300 offspring every 3 months, which needn't survive the perilous period as eggs or larvae like many other fishes do. They spread rapidly across a sea abounding with opportunity, ravaging the hordes of small poecilids that until now roamed with near impunity in a world without predators. They are absent now only from the coldest of polar waters, where the most adaptable small guppies can still glean a brief reprieve from their hunts, though even there death is never far, as these regions experience a boom in the population of cold water jellyfishes, taking advantage of this food source. A sustainable, balanced ecosystem is beginning to appear now. For the past 2 million years, the ants have experienced an incredible boom in diversity, coming to fulfill all manner of niches. This was not meant to last, however. As the insects proliferated, their own potential as a resource gradually emerged in the moon's budding ecosystem. Among the first creatures to take notice of this were the ladybird beetles. Originally being specialist predators of aphids, these insects and their larvae were heavily targeted as pests and subsequently a food source by many species of ants which, as on Earth, made use of these plant eaters for the sweet honeydew they produced. Within only 1.5 million years, however, the beetles began to evolve clever ways to avoid these new predators. By mirroring the pheromones of their own larvae, the ladybird's larvae began to trick their very predators, not only into avoiding them, but in a complete behavioral switch to nurturing them. Thinking their own offspring had somehow become lost outside the nest, the ants would promptly pick them back up and bring them home, utterly unaware that these larvae were in fact imposters whom, once having infiltrated the nest, would now be able to grow fat and happy, gorging on their own larvae, while simultaneously under the ants' excellent protection. Within only a few 100,000 years, a new phenomenon began to appear. Formicid colony collapse syndrome, the end result of several years of the aptly named cuckoo ladybirds' infiltration and predation, significantly reduced the lifespan of individual colonies and their abilities to grow to exceptional sizes. Other ants, too, would become increasingly problematic as different factions began to come into increasing competition. Faced with a food shortage of their own doing, resulting from the extinction of the biggest land snails and first rush of small ground-nesting birds that had incited their speciation in the first place, many species of ants returned their attentions to the invertebrates, including one another. In desperation, the large and bulky empire ants, unable to find sufficient avian prey, began to mob their smaller neighbors and rob them of their own food stores and larvae. It did not take long for the cuckoo ladybird to adapt even to this and mimic these species' pheromones too, moving from one host to another. Now slowly starving off and being cannibalized from the inside, the age of the empire ant, a creature which had, in the face of an evolutionary vacuum, grown too specialized for a food source now gone, would come to a close as soon as it had arisen, their jaws having become unsustainably large and their heavy bodies too bulky to easily climb any longer. Unable to make sufficient use of any food source beyond defenseless land snails or the young nestlings of canaries, their rule of the planet would be short and soon forgotten as a radiation of increasingly specialized, insectivorous birds began to incorporate the ants into their own diets. A combination of factors which, over coming millennia, would continue to push back the insect's role in the ecosystem to a more usual level. However, two groups of ants in particular would continue to expand their horizons. With the largest tetrapod herbivore at this time no larger than a ring-necked dove, the leafcutter ants would remain unchallenged in their niche for many millions of years more. By now having followed the spread of the bamboo forest worldwide, they have specialized faster than nearly any other creature on the planet, with different forms adapting to feed on all manner of distinct plants in every climate region. In more open environments, the honey ants too have experienced a rapid explosion of diversity as the world's most abundant flying species, with diets ranging from flower buds and pollen to other insects and small gastropods captured, killed, and carried away to single subterranean dwellings as larder for ravenous larvae. Many forms have already broken away from their colonial nature and live solitary lives, not unlike Earth's wasps. The clade's universal lack of venomous stings at this time has encouraged an equally great explosion in the numbers of insectivorous canaries, which now travel in great flocks in pursuit of this new food source. The brief age of insect domination begins to wane as a growing diversity of birds begin to displace them. 5 million years after the first canary birds were freed upon a world of endless grassland and meadow, the world of Serina has already undergone several major transformations. It did not take long for the prairie grasses that initially covered the world to be pushed back by their distant relatives, the hard-wooded bamboo, as they rapidly spread and shaded the land of a world which offered them no competition. Among the fastest growing of all plants, they spread and filled in a world otherwise without trees at a phenomenal rate, by now growing in dense and often monocropped thickets from pole to pole wherever sufficient soil moisture allows, leaving expansive grasslands only where precipitation is too minimal for the growth of bamboo woodland. The domain of the leaf-cutter ant. Innumerable billions of these insects still scurry in hordes throughout the forest, gathering leaves and shoots at a rate only surpassed by the incredible growth of the grass they feed upon, with shoots rising from expansive rhizomes at up to 4 feet per day. Underground, colonies of these insects now extend for hundreds of miles in all directions underground. Supercolonies have begun to form, combining their efforts to produce the largest single colonies of any insect ever documented, with likely populations reaching into the trillions. Each and every one of them is a member of a single cohesive colony, providing food for a series of underground fungal gardens that might exceed 100 feet below ground. Without moles or rodents, subterranean habitats are home instead to gigantic earthworms, crickets, and millipedes, while an ecosystem, still deficient in large predators, experiences nutrient turnover instead through the actions of billions of burying beetles, which following the extinction of the empire ant are provided with an infinite and mostly untapped food source in the form of deceased birds, resulting now in their own population boom. By working to turn all carcasses they discover under the soil, they not only provide food for their own young, but keep the surface environment clean and free of disease, while also returning needed nutrients to the soil, where they will feed countless insects and microorganisms before one day being returned to the plants themselves. A world so far dominated by insects is slowly being taken over again by the vertebrates, as the birds, equally freed from empire ant predations, begin to diversify at their fastest rate yet. The age of the leafcutter ant is far from over, but the insects are no longer the sole rulers of their niche, now as various forms, not only of birds, but also of other invertebrates, begin to compete with, prey upon, or otherwise exploit the leafcutters. 5 million years post-establishment, the first truly herbivorous canaries, which feed predominantly on leafy plant matter in favor of seeds or insect food, have begun to diverge. Several unique forms have simultaneously lost power of flight, or at least reduced it, and begun to develop an increasingly large, powerful bill to tear coarse foliage and a large gut to digest and make use of it. For another brief time, the world is largely free of predators, and flocks of increasingly squat, poor-flying, and flightless birds are free to spread out far and wide. From plump, dove-like ancestors 2 million years ago have already emerged forms as large as chickens, turkeys, even geese, an exponential increase in size allowed by a total lack of predatory selection or competition for resources. The wings and often even legs of these birds have rarely grown in tandem with their immense bodies, and they are slow, awkward animals, nesting on the ground and out in the open and having few if any defenses, as they still needn't worry about predators. Faced with this first major wave of avian diversity, the leafcutter ant empire begins to wane in both northern and southern temperate belts, as the ants are slowly squeezed back to their ancestral tropical climates, unable to compete during cold winters with growing hordes of plant-eating birds that can remain active throughout the year, and ravaged during their seasonal hibernation by equally large flocks of increasingly specialized insectivores. 5 million years has been sufficient time for several independent lineages of ancestral seed-eaters to take almost completely to a diet of insects and arthropods, and quickly converge upon the warblers, the thrushes, and the wrens of their ancestral world. Among the most derived of such forms are the poor-flying sprinter serins, which are now among the most common of all the ground-feeding birds. With long, probing bills and lengthy, sturdy legs, some of these vaguely plover-like passerines have already largely given up flight, one of the first carnivorous lineages to do so, and taken to a terrestrial habit, some dashing through the undergrowth of the bamboo forests, and others scurrying through sandy savannas and between sparse prairie grasses, with a few forms, such as the red-sided pond diver, even beginning to feed from the water in riverine environments. All are in search of the insects and other invertebrates they now feed almost exclusively upon. But the diver may already include fishes in its Catholic diet, with others favoring ants, others slugs, and others still crickets or beetles. This earliest wave of ground predators shows great potential for long-term survival, as still infinite food supplies fuel an incredible rate of evolution, as a world unnaturally barren continues to fill in its own gaps. Carnivory is also beginning in the skies, as the ancestral egg-eater canaries have given rise to increasingly bold and opportunistic forms, the shriekers. Relatively large birds, these boisterous and social species have taken their egg-eating tendencies well past hatching, and have become particularly suited to the killing and eating of nestlings, fledglings, and even weak adult birds, with their increasingly sharp, sometimes hooked beaks. The jays of the canary world, though they remain highly generalistic, indeed still consuming a fair amount of green food, seeds, and insects, they are already beginning to show increasing adaptations to both form and habit to a predatory ideal. Forest birds can no longer leave their nests unattended without worry of the shriekers. Having been watching from a distance, may now descend immediately to savage their young, one member of a mated pair distracting the mother hen, and the other going in to slaughter the chicks. Among the first mutations that developed in the Serinian bird population was an incredible diversity of color, evolved for lack of carnivorous concern. But in recent times, rising predator worries means many small birds now exhibit increased selection for camouflage, particularly of hens on the nest. So too reappear formerly relaxed, atrophied instincts of parental care, lost during several eons of safety in all small bird species, while for the large ground bird's size, for now, leaves their otherwise defenseless young unmolested by Serina's first small but specializing predators. Above, a newly evolved species of open water poecilid descended from the swordtail. A fast-swimming open water predator, it has already evolved a crescent-shaped tail and highly streamlined, torpedo-like body as adaptation for maximum hydrodynamics. It swims just below the surface, where oxygen levels remain habitable even during frequent anoxia events of this era, and preys on smaller shoals of fish. Known as the emerald keeltail, this is one of the earliest pelagic predators in Serine oceans to evolve. Its perfectly streamlined body shape has been shaped by evolution to allow very fast movement. And with average size of 25 inches long, the keeltail is significantly bigger than its Earth ancestors. However, its physiology and internal anatomy is still very much unchanged. The only significant difference between the keeltail and the ancestral swordtail is a much greater concentration of myoglobin inside its muscles. This gives the keeltail greater stamina and enables it to stay in motion throughout its entire life without any rest, which is very important in the open sea where food is sparse. Illustration by Pruradkor at deviantart.com. Though riverine habitats now teem with life, Serina's seas have lagged behind the land in developing ecological stability. The seas of Serina from a modest initial stock, quickly became rich with life. Billions of fishes soon flocked and shoaled its waters, as a food chain beginning to form in earnest, as increasingly large and specialized hunters, mainly in the form of swordtails, pursued unfathomably immense shoals of smaller pelagic live-bearers, fed by copious planktonic algae and copepods. Forests of kelp and algae colonize all sunny seashores, feeding shoals of beautifully colored, otherworldly grazers, sea slugs, which may grow as large as dogs, and immense herbivorous sea snails with shells over 5 feet long, a last remnant of a brief time of mollusk domination long since ended on land. Taking the niches of sea cows in early Serina's waters. Of all Serina's earliest freshwater stock, the 3 live bearers, the crayfishes, the shrimps, the snails. Only the platyfish, a creature which has led far greater success in the niches of riverine cyprinids, has not successfully infiltrated marine environments by this time, though remnant genes resulting from early swordtail hybridization likely still remain within the sea's new apex predators' genomes. From the sunlit shoreline environments, the Sirenian Sea often looks completely pristine, with beautiful fishes, great colorful sea slugs, and large, brightly colored crabs abounding in clear waters. However, as one moves several hundred miles out to sea, the oceans of 5 million years post-establishment have slowly become a slowly ticking time bomb. Gone is the era of unbridled peace of past millennia. As a result of no significant organisms moving through different levels of water as they do on Earth, distributing nutrients and oxygen, and nearly all life existing within 100 feet of the surface, Serina's benthic zones have become stagnant and anoxic. Blooms of anaerobic bacteria which, in death, release highly toxic substances into the water now occur regularly, including large-scale die-offs of marine life, which in turn release enough nutrients to produce even larger red tides, toxic algal blooms, which may be carried via currents for thousands of miles, causing harm to all life they come across. Serina's open oceans are in constant flux, and lifeforms struggle to establish themselves as great swaths of water are periodically cleansed of virtually all advanced life, often becoming breeding grounds for fleeting population explosions of jellyfishes and little else. Though rapidly breeding and highly adaptable live-bearing fishes, shrimps, and copepods are among the best suited of creatures to rebound following such a calamity, their very ability of rapid reproduction becomes their downfall. Smaller forms able to survive these periodically difficult conditions, left initially after each die-off without less hardy predators, until these are able to migrate back from unaffected regions, then experience enormous population increases until they use up their food supplies, and initiate a new die-off and begin the cycle anew. Life in Serina's open oceans is therefore a rapid race for all creatures, not only against one another, but against time, to breed and spread out before ecological collapse occurs again, hoping some of your descendants manage to have migrated far enough away to avoid it this time. Even in the best of times, most of Serina's oceans are at this time only habitable for the first 100 feet, with waters any deeper exhibiting a fatal lack of oxygen, and the majority of organisms concentrated within the first 20 to 50 feet of depth at the surface, where nutrients are most available. Marine predators have adapted towards a highly migratory habit, moving hundreds of miles per week across entire oceans in order to avoid toxic algal blooms and find widely spaced pockets of high prey concentration. As an odd disparity widens between predator and prey, with prey becoming smaller, hardier, and better able to survive periods of low oxygen, and predators growing increasingly large and mobile in order to find it when times are good and flee toxic conditions when they are bad. Inland, rivers and lakes, largely isolated from marine catastrophe, teem with life and ecological stability far ahead of the open sea. A variety of aquatic grasses, algae, clovers, and elodea feed and provide cover for countless forms of small fishes, crustaceans, and gastropods. In absence of competition, the parthenogenic crayfish has redeveloped a male gender and subsequently began to spread and diversify, following an initial period of decline due to the harmful effects of Muller's ratchet. Without competition, the descendants of these small lobsters become the first major herbivores, as well as scavengers of lake and river, and now reach weights of 40 pounds or more and lengths of 4 feet, some of the largest of all arthropods. They share this niche in many regions with the 15-pound Great Blue Lake snail, one of the heaviest by body weight of all gastropods, an enormous trapdoor snail which grazes swaths of freshwater vegetation like a veritable lawnmower. The largest active riverine predators of this era are fishes, but not exclusively swordtails as in the sea. In freshwater, the humble guppy has produced its own unique hunters in the gupfishes, a diverse and rapidly speciating clade of cichlid-like poecilids, notable for large, extendable jaws and a muscular, stocky body plan, much like that of a bass or grouper. In contrast to the streamlined, fast-swimming predatory swordtails, gupfishes are usually ambush hunters, lying in wait and lunging at small prey which is inhaled and swallowed whole. Ranging in size from less than 2 inches to more than 4 feet, they are already one of Serina's most ecologically diverse clades, despite current freshwater restrictions. Without many predators, animals of all sorts have grown enormous in Serina's warm, shallow seas 10 million years hence, as 6-foot-long giant live-bearer fishes descend from the platy and swordtail, graze on meadows of marine algae, alongside man-sized sea slugs colorful giant crayfish, and one of Serina's early predator fishes, a barracuda-like ambush-hunting swordtail that lurks beneath floating algae. The world is now stable, yet in ever-changing flux, as the Hypostecenic era, the era of new beginnings, draws to a close. In millennia to come, the tropical planet, for the most part quite equally warm and mild throughout the era, will begin to cool, entering into a new and more temperate climatic condition brought about by the simultaneous separation of Ventisca and Striata through tectonic forces, opening up a wide expanse of water and altering global currents, and the formation of a stark, tall mountain range as Striata continues to collide southwards with Walteria, closing in an inland sea and dramatically altering weather patterns. Within only a few million years more, the ribbon-shaped arching supercontinent of Cirrus will become two independent landmasses, stretched broadly parallel north to south, separated by a growing expanse of sea, not to collide again for over 100 million years. 10 million years post-establishment has brought great changes to the world of Serina, as for perhaps the first time, life has evolved to fill the once vacuum of the moon's young ecosystem with a thriving, stable, and diverse, if still relatively conservative, array of life forms growing increasingly distinct from their earthly counterparts with each generation. The seas now experience fewer die-offs, as a number of small but very numerous organisms, among them crustaceans, copepods, and even fishes, finally adapt to colonize deeper and deeper depths to make use of an accumulating and untouched food source in the form of marine snow, organic surface debris carried from teeming sunlit waters into the darkness below, which, without anything to consume it, can sometimes be found built up into layers several meters thick on the deepest sea floors. Moving vertically through these waters from seabed to surface, they now pull with them water molecules, unsettling stagnant waters and kickstarting the actions of the currents and circulation necessary to move nutrients and oxygen through the seas to support a stable ecosystem. With carbon, in the form of decomposed nutrients, which for the past millions of years has settled out of reach at the bottoms of the world's seas, now returning to the surface, healthy plant growth flourishes in the sunlit waters, starving off more opportunistic but harmful bacteria and fungal outbreaks that now struggle to explode into their prior numbers as the sea around them grows stronger and more established. Marine fishes and invertebrates experience their greatest booms yet in diversity as the seas of the world of birds begin to clear. Shallow, sunlit regions support unfathomably large fields of kelp and macroscopic algae, which without competition spread across calm seabeds as densely as grass upon the shore. Oceanic regions support enormous tracts of sargassum and similar untethered foliage that forms dense green mats across the surface, forming free-floating reefs tens of miles wide in places and home to infinite sorts of small creatures. Shrimps, fishes, snails, and bivalves, the latter hitching a ride on mobile floating forests to filter the seas in style, no longer tied down to a single rocky spot like their ancestors. Though there are no sea cows or turtles to browse them, they support literal herds of hundreds of millions of herbivores nevertheless. Toothed carps, some of which grow as long as a small car, and descendants of the little red and yellow platyfishes, once kept so often as aquarium pets, shoal along the sand, mowing down great tracts of greenery with vacuum-like, downturned mouths, alongside shoals of enormous sea slugs heavier than a man, the largest gastropods ever to evolve. Along coastal regions, the land begins to grow out further to sea as sediment begins to build up amongst the roots and shoots of seaside bamboos, already spread across the globe through all but the most inhospitable terrestrial habitats. Following the example of the mangrove and beginning to test their legs at sea as they've begun to develop more and more advanced methods of removing salt from their tissues in order to take claim on one of the last biomes they've yet to gain total domination of. They take with them their army of insects. Leafcutter ants, following an initial and significant decline at the hands of newly evolving predators, begin now to recover their diversity following the new tendencies of some species to chew out their nests directly within the naturally hollow shoots of their host plants, making themselves much less available to predation while simultaneously avoiding many of the troubles of hitchhikers and unwanted nest parasites in the form of countless other insects, which are more than happy to exploit the ants' efforts as their colonies, with still little to stop them, grow to hundreds if not thousands of times the size of what nature probably intended on Earth. On the ground, many birds have already specialized as myrmecophages, consuming great quantities of ants as they forage, but few have yet adapted that are able to reach the insects within the hard shells of bamboo stalks, with one notable exception. One group of small and brilliantly colorful insect-eating birds, still rather generalistic and clearly finch-like, begins to adopt the use of sharp stems stuck through the insect's small entrance holes to fish out the plump larvae and circumvent this new defense. Originating in the south of Ankiska, the tool finches, their successful abilities becoming genetically inherited, begin to spread across the supercontinent, exploiting all manner of new niches as they go along. Avian diversity elsewhere has also skyrocketed within the last 5 million years, as truly distinguishable new families appear, with carnivores, insectivores, ground predators, and all variety of herbivores, in addition to ancestral seed eaters, popping up from initially modest stocks, spreading across the world from pole to pole, and following the spread of the forest to the edge of the sea and beyond, as multiple groups, both plant and meat-eating, expand their views for the first significant time to the sea as a source of sustenance and shelter. Canaries run about the ground like gamefowl. They flit through the trees and glean insects with long pointed bills. Some even wade in rivers, nibbling at water plants or snapping at the bounty of piscine, insect, and invertebrate life that flourish within them. Some birds, such as the ancestors of the pond divers, even submerge and swim for their supper, grabbing insects from the riverbed several meters below the surface. True predators diversify from the shrieker line, as well as several terrestrial sorts, as the former, with increasingly hooked bills and strong talons, become increasingly specialized as airborne hunters of other birds, while the latter in cursorial predators, if for now only of bugs. Throughout inland habitats, many species, provided limitless food, begin to break the megafaunal size barrier in the evolutionary arms race to outsize their predators, a race that can only go so far. Some plant-eating birds are now approaching, for the first time, sizes of hundreds of pounds or even more. These first megafauna are lethargic, slow-breeding, and short-legged animals, having evolved no need for speed or defense. Being so large, they find little concern in the predations of small ground hunters, and so have had no need to evolve the long legs and endurance of most earthly ground birds. Far larger than any airborne predators, they have had no need to evolve any defensive behaviors or counters beyond bigness. Swollen, placid, and quite honestly overgrown, the reign of the second diversity of non-flying birds. Though not the earliest forms, still an early, rapidly scrawled draft unlikely to make it into the final production, is, with no particular evolutionary innovations beyond vacuum-induced gigantism, clearly not one intended to last in a rapidly changing world, but is a plan that, for now, still works. While bamboo, in its various forms, has come to fill the ecological niches of broadleaf trees on Earth, flowering plants are beginning to catch up. Clovers grow to the size of small trees in wet tropical forests, while dry plains, insufficient in precipitation to permit the growth of fleshier plants, are dominated by patchy scrub woodlands of strange trunked flowers. Hardy dandelions begin to grow considerably taller than their ancestral populations in response to a lack of competition, with woody rhizomes once confined to spreading below the soil, now occurring above the ground, sometimes carrying their terminal tuft of greens and blossoms 5 feet above the soil or more, escaping the hungers of most smaller animals, while simultaneously rising above the prairie grasses that provide their main competition at the time. A world without conifers also leaves giant perennial sunflowers with blossoms 3 feet in diameter, the base of the forest ecosystem, in temperate regions too dry for bamboo forest, but wetter than scrubland, annual forests that die to the soil with each winter, but rise with the warmth of spring to heights of 15 meters to bloom and set seed. An enormous bounty exploited by immense flocks of migratory finches, several billions in number, which travel continents north to south, timing their travels to coincide with the setting of seed of different species and in different climate zones. These sunflower woodlands are particularly prone to wildfire as they dry up and brown in the late summer, but are ideally adapted to survive this, with deeply insulated root systems below the soil and the ability to regrow their entire height within a single season, leaving them much more stable than conifer woodlands, but also even less diverse. Very little survives in them throughout the year, with most species able to survive here only seasonally and leaving for better territory during the winter when their food and shelter runs out. Scuttling beneath the soil, earthworms, crickets, and of course ants still find little competition for fossorial niches, with some being free to grow to relatively enormous sizes. Earthworms 30 feet long are not uncommon deep in the subsoils of the north, and your average burrowing cricket of maybe 4 inches long is now considered quite a small fry compared to the largest living forms, the rabbit-sized, root-eating behemoths that come out to graze by night in the southern prairies of Walteria, where to supplement their diets, they may even overpower and consume birds as they sleep on their roosts at night. By the time chordates get around to adopting to the same niches, many will find that there's not very much room, as for once in their lives, the invertebrates find themselves with an upper hand to the vertebrates. A songbird is simply not meant to burrow and will require much modification before it can ever truly compete. The most the canaries do at this time is perhaps nest in small soil depressions, scratched out with their talons, and the largest specialized insect hunter is still scarcely larger than a gull, leaving the insects very much dominant in at least one biome for perhaps many more millennia. The world of Serina, 10 million years post-establishment, is a warm, rich, and prospering one. Birds, insects, fish, grasses, and flowers have speciated explosively to fill the ecological vacuum of their new world, forming a myriad of rich biomes worldwide, both familiar and entirely unique to this world. With a climate that is tropical in all but the most polar of regions, with even these being only equivalent to the temperate broadleaf forests of Earth, conditions are, at this time, ideal for colonizing species. However, Serina's current mild climate comes at a price. Global rainfall levels during the Hypostecene, particularly the latter of the era, are considerably lower than those on Earth, a result of relatively flat and comparable thin landmasses over which air flows rapidly, with storms often bypassing land entirely, blowing from one sea to the next before releasing rain. While Serina at this point still lacks widespread desert, a gradual trend began immediately following the abandonment of the planet towards aridity. Following 5 to 6 million years of almost complete dominion over land, bamboo groves begin to recede to more coastal environments, where rainfall levels are more sufficient to nurture widespread forest, leaving inland regions the domain of prairie grasses and flowering plants, among them sunflowers, clover, and dandelion derivatives, which are better adapted towards lengthy periods of drought. Rainforest, or its equivalent, is the rarest biome present on Serina, occurring only sporadically along shoreline environments or in the shadows of the moon's few large mountain ridges, where coastal clouds are trapped and their water collected. In central Ankiska, however, there does exist one notable region of high rainfall occurring despite no major mountains in the immediate vicinity, due to the region's extremely low elevation, several hundred feet below sea level. Here, one finds an enormous valley that is growing wider by the century as the continent is torn by continental drift, being gradually pulled apart into two by continental forces, with a significant fault line running directly through its center, east to west. Eventually, the landmass will have split into two, with the southern portion of Ankiska colliding with the north of Stevlandia, forming another large island continent. With the ground so low here, the plains of this valley are the final resting place for all rains from both continents, which gradually flow over hundreds of miles of savanna, both north and south, to settle here in the largest floodplain in the world. Bamboo flourishes here, as do the highest diversity of flowering plants on Earth. Several thousand charted species now diverged from clovers alone, which grow large and colorful in the absence of significant competition. Wetland-adapted sunflowers are present, but grasses are dominant here, with dense thickets popping up wherever conditions allow, providing food for countless small invertebrates and feeding and nesting habitat for tens of millions of birds. From one have come many. Behold, the banquet of canary diversity of the Ankiskan floodplains 10 million years post-establishment. Womblers, order Passeriformes, family Fringillidae, subfamily Barocerinae, roughly dim-witted canary, in reference to the small head-to-body ratios of these large terrestrial birds. Genus Barocerinus. Species illustrated Barocerinus magnificus, the greater red-crowned wambler. Towering above all fellows and feeding almost exclusively on the foliage of bamboo, some of the largest living land animals of the time are of this ecoregion. 350-pound herbivorous behemoths, a megafaunal family known only on this continent, the womblers. Standing up to 7.5 feet tall, they stand almost pillar erect on thick-set, trunked limbs, their bodies inflexible and towering. Their once useful wings, now entirely useless and almost completely absent. They are slow and plodding, very steady on their feet, for if they fall over, they will find it most strenuous to right themselves again, and in boggy conditions, perhaps impossible altogether, though they are highly buoyant and able to float well in water. Though by megafaunal standards they're not huge compared to their ancestors, which may have weighed less than 3 ounces, they have increased in size by several thousand times and have inflated to such sizes at an unprecedented rate. Without predators to concern them, they have evolved no ability to move quickly and amble methodically, eating almost every hour of the day and night to provide themselves with enough energy just to survive on, using large and heavy-set shearing bills to cut shoots and stems, which are swallowed whole to be broken down with gastroliths. They are more or less defenseless and nest upon the ground, hatching a single chick from a 15-pound egg every 3rd year, which is still entirely altricial and dependent on parental care, laying in a crude nest of grass on their bellies, unfeathered until about 5 months of age and requiring warmth from the parents at almost all times, and gaping for food until it is over 100 pounds. Only then can its legs be developed sufficiently so as to support its weight, a weight it will take 16 months to reach on such a poor diet, almost entirely the shoots of bamboo, as it is provided. Even after it can stand, it will not feed itself adequately for more than another year, relying on its parents for its survival for a total period of almost 30 months. Sexual maturity is not reached for another 4 years, though lifespans can extend a number of decades, for as adults there exists no land animal sufficiently powerful to harm them, save for one another. A lack of predator fear has gone hand in hand with a lack of fear for conflicts in this clade. While otherwise incredibly peaceable, males will often fight one another to the death over females during nesting seasons, and even outside them, and will casually engage in lasting and potentially deadly battle for the most trivial of purpose, simply as a matter of course. So intense are the fighting instincts of the males that, in a most ironic twist, despite having evolved to have no predators, male mortality is incredibly high, with 80% of all animals dying from fight-related injury, most commonly a leg shattered by a powerful blow of the opponent's bill, before their 20th birthday. A lifespan that females, much more docile and herding animals, may outdo by 3 times. It is so that the very lack of predators in the Wombler's environment, which require the evolution of a healthy and natural level of fear to survive alongside in a normal environment, have resulted not only in animals which have no predator fear, but no fear at all, and subsequently none of the natural inhibition of animals in more natural environments to avoid unnecessary conflict. To a Wombler, every conflict must be fought, and there is no flight, only fight. It has been noted that the high-intensity, intraspecific aggression of the male Wombler draws very close parallels to behavioral disorders sometimes found in dogs bred to be low fear. A lack of fear, without very careful management, can easily go hand in hand with a lack of fight inhibition, with the potential existing to produce truly dangerous animals. It should be noted that, like most birds of Serina, the instinctive tendency to sing, both in courtship and territorial aggression, has not been lost. Male Womblers of most species are very avid singers, with their songs being almost identical on inspection to those of modern canaries, but slowed down 5 to 10 times and brought down several octaves, as if slowed with audio editing software. The impression furthered by the throat and bill of the singing male, which move in equally slowed measure as if the live animal is being seen via high-resolution, slow-motion film. Axebills. Order Passeriformes. Family Fringillidae. Subfamily Dromiocerinae, or running serin. Genus Magnorhynchus, or giant beak. Species illustrated Magnificus imperator, or the imperial axebill. Axebills, which, along with other birds of the Dromaeocerinae, diverged from warblers and others of the Barocerinae 6 million years ago, are a widespread genus of relatively large, bustard to emu-sized, flightless ground birds which feed predominantly on coarse grasses and in which the male exhibits a considerably enlarged bill casque used in intraspecific display, but not combat, for the bill, while large and seemingly strong, is in fact very fragile and composed almost wholly of keratin. While both groups descend from a common flightless ancestor, the two groups have gone down different paths, with the Barocerinae having become overall large and stocky birds, while the Dromaeocerinae have become more lightly built and capable runners. For while warblers and kin are sedentary browsers of stable environments, Dromaeocerans, axebills included, are on the whole highly migratory animals of the open plains, adapted to cover very wide distances throughout the year as they follow seasonal rains and the flushes of green growth they bring to the savannas. Found throughout Ankiska and Central Striata, flocks of the imperial axebill, the most common species of the time period, may cover over 1,000 miles in a year in flocks several million strong as they follow the rains, relying on unknown cues to find them. It is possible their sense of smell may be of more use than most birds. It is only when they find them that the normally highly gregarious birds will disband from their herds and come into breeding condition, with the males molting from normally dull browns and grays into a rich attire of bright reds and yellows. Males form leks, gathering by the thousand in choice meadows and displaying, flashing their brilliant colorful neck patches and belting out lengthy and varied sequences of bubbly song, having the best chance of procuring a mate by having the largest and most outsized bill casque, a signal that any male who can carry such a handicap and still survive must be of excellent genes, and most varied motif. Every lady loves a little music to set the mood. A hen, her bill far smaller than her mates and her plumage less exuberant, will still likely mate with a number of attractive males, ensuring that of them all, only the best manage to fertilize her eggs, which are laid in groups of 2 or 3 directly upon the ground and incubated as well as fed solely by the hen. Following the breeding season, males band together into large bachelor herds until the females return with young in tow several months later. While they have few predators, Dromaeocerans have nevertheless already undergone significant adaptations towards a precocial reproductive strategy in recent millennia, as increasingly seasonal, dry climatic conditions mean that sizable quantities of food are impermanent and sporadic. As a result, a lengthy time period of juvenile helplessness just isn't possible when food supplies in any one region may only remain for several months. While smaller flying birds can circumvent this by rapid growth from egg to fledgling in only a few weeks. For a bird so large, complete maturity is impossible in such a small time frame, which is why Dromaeocerans are notable for hatching out of their eggs fully covered in soft down and able to stand and walk after only 10 to 15 days. While they will be dependent on their mothers for food and protection from the elements and predatory attack for far longer, as long as they are mobile, the young can follow their parents to new pastures as they green, to continue the rearing process elsewhere. Some species of dromaeosaurians will even carry their young upon their backs, nestled in the plumage, when they are very young and unable to walk far on their own. Most axebills, typical for the clade, are omnivorous with a preference for plant matter, using their large beaks to tear grasses and fibrous flower stalks, which consume only marginal quantities of animal protein in the form of insects and invertebrates, though young are offered considerable quantities of crickets and other meaty insects during rearing when rapid growth and development demands increased protein intake. Aardgeese, order Passeriformes, family Fringillidae, subfamily Dromaeosaurinae, genus Solomornis, ground-living bird. Species illustrated: Solomornis valavivis, valley aardgoose. Aardgeese are basal, highly successful dromaeosaurians native to all major landmasses on Serina during the late Hypostecene, with the exception of Stevlandia and extreme southern Kari. Named for their flightlessness and diet of soft grasses and water plants, not for any tendency towards burrowing, they split off from the group very early on, relatively speaking, roughly 5 million years ago, when the climate was marginally wetter, allowing these birds of floodplains and marshland to spread worldwide before becoming isolated to a number of smaller habitats, surrounded by drier seasonal savannas less conducive to their survival. By and large, they are conservatively colored, medium-sized flightless birds, ranging from 10 pounds at their extreme smallest to upwards of 80 pounds at their best, closely related to axebills and very nearly resembling the ancestral form from which these and other more derived dromaeosaurians evolved from. Behaviorally, they are very alike others of their clade, though unlike axebills, this species does not lek. Instead, males control small harems of 3 to 5 hens, the young of which he assists in rearing. The chicks of this genus are similarly precocial compared to other canaries, with this species too engaging in transporting the young upon their back. Aardgeese are predominantly birds of terrestrial but near water habitats, but swim well, being plump and buoyant, and can cross rivers and lakes relatively easily thanks to their slightly webbed feet. While they can survive away from large sources of water and may cross large distances of dry land seasonally, they rely largely on high-protein algae and aquatic invertebrates to rear their young, and do not breed successfully in drier upland environments. Hens lay 4 to 5 eggs at a time, but will rarely wean more than 3, as the youngest is often bullied by its older siblings, for the hen begins sitting as soon as the first egg is laid, meaning this chick hatches up to a week before its younger relatives, and often takes their share of the food. The nest is a simple structure of grass and dried mud, often placed near water. Both sexes of aardgeese sing, the hen joining the male during courtship, though the song is comparably basic to the ancestral canary's melody and highly repetitive, a short series of 3 to 8 whistles and clicks repeated with very little variation. When startled or upset, aardgeese will honk plaintively and will growl and hiss if further pressed. Aardgeese are normally social flocking birds, though opposing males may battle during courtship season, kicking at one another with their sharp hind claws. These battles rarely cause lasting injury. Stiltskins, Order Passeriformes, Family Fringillidae, Subfamily Oravora, shore eater, Genus Oravoravis, shore-eating bird, Species illustrated, Oravoravis purpuripectus, the violet-breasted stiltskin. A portmanteau of stilt and siskin, long-legged proto-wading birds, which range in size similarly to modern plovers, are found throughout most Serinian continents in a variety of habitats, particularly coastal, where they feed on algae, water plants, seed, and small invertebrates stirred up from shallow water or tall grass with the long legs and pointed bill. Still capable flyers, they are highly migratory in some locales, nesting far towards the poles and wintering near the equator. They breed near water in the branches of taller herbaceous plants, building a sturdy nest of twigs, and the young are typically altricial for songbirds, though born with a coat of down and with eyes that will open after only 2 days. Some stiltkins sing, and some have largely lost this habit, their calls reverting to simple screams, chirps, and warbles. Most stiltskins are highly gregarious, breeding in colonies. There is little to no male-to-male aggression, and the species is seasonally monogamous. Gallowalts, Order Passeriformes, Family Fringillidae, Subfamily Undicopterinae, rounded-winged, Genus Galliopteryx, or chicken wing, Genus illustrated Galliopteryx magnerosa, or the big red gallowalt. Opportunistic omnivores, gallowalts occur on all Serinian landmasses by the late Hypostecene, derived from the same terrestrial, predominantly plant-eating stock, which would later give rise to both barocerans and dromaeocerans. While these groups would lose flight entirely, gallowalts, which are generally no larger than turkeys, still retain it, albeit only on a basic level and for only short-distance use, preferring to scratch around the soil for their food. Gallowalts eat mainly seeds, berries, and insects, but will also consume fallen nestlings, tender green shoots, and snails if the opportunity arises. Young gallowalts are less well-developed at hatching than the young of dromaeocerans, but grow more quickly and can run at 3 weeks of age, fly at 8. Both the male and female care for the young, typically 3 or 4, with males sometimes taking 2 mates at once, but frequently being monogamous for a given season. Male gallowalts attract mates with an extremely complex song, sung while perched above the ground in an open space, in which they combine hundreds of different verses of both their own creation as well as sounds and calls mimicked from other birds and even insects. While singing, Males add a visual aspect to their performances in the form of a large, divided throat pouch colored brightly blue and red, which they inflate while singing. The same structure also occurs in hens, though considerably smaller, and hens will often sing, albeit less skillfully, during the height of the mating season if a male cannot be found, in hopes to contact one. They are extremely attuned mimics, and both sexes will also utilize the copied calls of larger predatory birds to frighten off smaller sorts that may harm their eggs or young. The hen and cock are typically very similar in appearance, with the males being marginally larger and slightly more colorful. Qualts. Order Passeriformes. Family Fringillidae. Subfamily Undicopterinae, rounded-winged. Genus Corpulavis, plump bird. Species illustrated. Corpulavis pratabscondens, or the little prairie qualt, hooded gallowalt. Qualts, several species of which are also referred to as gallowalts, are a genus of Undicopterine ground canaries, native to central and southern Ankiska, down through Stevlandia, closely related to Galeopteryx, which approach more closely the flightless weight-to-wingspan barrier, and which almost never fly, preferring to run around close to the ground in tall grass, eating mainly seeds, flowers, and the larvae of beetles. Behaviorally, otherwise, they are very similar, though the song of the male is much more simple and does not involve mimicking. Hens sing rarely, if at all. Nests are often on the ground in plain sight, though in predator-rich areas, simple structures may be built in crudely fashioned depressions, in soft sand, and hidden with foliage. Males typically mate with half a dozen hens and help assist them all in feeding the young, with the hens doing all of the incubating. Shriekers. Order Passeriformes. Family Fringillidae. Subfamily Rhaptucerinae, or thief canary. Genus Rhancaudax, bold beak. Species illustrated. Rhancaudax vulgaris, common shrieker. Shriekers are a genus of thrush-sized, very bold and omnivorous canaries, and among the earliest predators to evolve in the Serenian ecosystem. While today some forms have further specialized in this regard, basal shriekers remain as one of the planet's most adaptable and wide-ranging bird groups, able to survive in almost all habitats and able to consume nearly anything, from seeds to fruit and berries, as well as insects, eggs, nestlings, and carrion. They are clever and aggressive birds that are particularly dangerous to other birds' nestlings, and they are very noisy and raucous birds, with harsh screaming calls that can be deafening when the birds gather in large flocks. Males will mate with multiple hens and help provide for them all to a minimal extent. The female builds the nest and incubates in a tussock of grass several meters off the ground. Nestlings grow and mature at a fast rate typical for small songbirds. Canaries and canary thrushes. Order Passeriformes. Family Fringillidae. Genus Serinus. Genus Ciscus. Species illustrated. Serinus nigrensis, black-cheeked canary, Ciscus caudrosa, rosy-tailed canary thrush, Ciscus albus, false white-eye. The black-cheeked canary and rosy-tailed canary thrush are small, sparrow-sized songbirds native only to the central and Giscon grasslands. Whilst many birds following introduction to the moon of Serina quickly diverged into distinct and new niches, a far greater number have kept to much more basal niches and appearances. Very basic true finches, even of the same or very closely related genus to the ancestral canary, are widely abundant throughout Serina, with some species having changed very little at all fundamentally over the course of their evolution. The black-cheeked canary is a typical, mostly herbivorous seed eater with a melodious song, which nests in low-lying clumps of grass and feeds its young, which fledge at 20 days similarly to other finches, predominantly insects and seeds. The canary thrush, one member of a more widely spread bird genus, is like most of its new genus, an insectivore, filling the niches of warblers and thrushes on Earth, and consuming only minimal quantities of plant matter. The little false white-eye, another species of canary thrush, is similar, though preys more on beetle larvae, worms, and gastropods, especially slugs, rather than adult insect prey, gleaning these from the undersides of leaves with a particularly thin, pointed bill. Doodlebirds. Order Passeriformes. Family Fringillidae. Subfamily Myrmecophagorinae, ant-eating birds. Genus Acurnychus, needlebeak. Species illustrated Acurnychus stevii, olive doodlebird. Acurnychus volans, primitive doodlebird. Serina's first true response to the overpopulation of ants, doodlebirds form a specious clade of borderline flightless. Some species can flutter minimally, others are grounded with significantly reduced wings, even within the same genus. Insectivorous canaries, which have adapted to consume almost nothing but ants, both adults and larvae, gathering the insects not only from their nests, which it disturbs by digging with its large clawed feet, moving away the sand with their wings, but simply running about the ground with long, thickly scaled legs to guard from bites, and up the stems of foliage, nipping up any ants they come across, thousands in a day. Typically no larger than a pigeon, they are commonplace in most environments, but very easily missed, being very fast and subdued in color, able to disappear into tall grass without a trace in front of your eyes. Doodlebirds nest in dense thickets of grass at ground level and rear their young exclusively on the larvae and eggs of ants, particularly honey ants. The young hatch blind and naked and grow quickly, though slower than smaller songbirds, fledging in 36 days, after which they run with their parents for another 2 weeks. During this time, parents will feign injury to lead would-be predators away from their young, in a manner similar to killdeers. Doodlebirds are unique among Serinin birds of the era in that they form lasting pair bonds of several years to life. though they will readily take new mates should something happen to their previous. Male doodlebirds no longer sing so much as coo in the manner of doves. It is a pleasant, plaintive call, but only of a few drawn-out notes. The little primitive doodlebird, as well as several related species, are, as their names suggest, the least specialized members of the genus, consuming significant amounts of beetles and crickets, in addition to ants, and being capable flyers for short distances. Larger species, such as the olive doodlebird, are entirely flightless, though can glide to an extent. Dugals. Order Passeriformes. Family Fringillidae. Subfamily Chimbammergornae, dipping boat bird. Genus Chimbammergornis. Species illustrated Chimbammergornis inelegans, inelegant dougal. Dugals are a diverse group of semi-aquatic canaries that feed predominantly on aquatic insects and water plants. Plump and stout, their bills are large and serrated, adapted to scraping algae, and their feet are webbed. Some of the first canaries on Serina to take the plunge into aquatic environments. They're awkward swimmers at best, not sure whether to use their wings or feet or both or neither for propulsion, and prefer to stay along the shoreline. Caught in flux, they're awkward on land and even more awkward on water, though have some leeway, for they are able to exploit a niche by feeding underwater that is otherwise entirely unused by other bird species. Some dugals can still fly, while others have lost the ability. About the size of a mallard duck, dugals are still confined to a dependent altricial childhood, though not quite so much as ancestral canaries, with the chicks being unable to swim until 3 weeks of age, being hidden until then in a large rounded ground nest of grasses and mud in which the hen alone incubated the eggs. The male and female both feed the young. The male is generally not a good parent and often leaves his hen for a new mate a few weeks after they hatch, leaving the hen alone to parent them. 6 eggs may be laid, and if both parents help feed this many may fledge. But in cases where the hen must mother alone, half of the young typically do not survive to this point. Dugals are interesting in that singing has been completely lost, and the male has almost no courtship beyond a few simple chirps, simply jumping on the hen to copulate and affirming the pair bond in a most unceremonious manner. Sunflower barrens are a sort of biome in progress, a rather unnatural and impermanent forest type that won't last indefinitely. With the soil around them inhibited from colonization by other plant species due to the toxic tannins released by the plants of the sunflower family. These woodlands are more the result of the sunflower's adaptable nature in an environment without competition than a lasting ecosystem type. Until other plant species come to better tolerate their presence in the soil, they are abnormally lacking in floral biodiversity and subsequently that of animals too, thus their common name. For much of the year, they're virtual green deserts, alive, beautiful, but almost wholly lacking in food. with only a small number of insects feeding on the foliage, in turn providing food for a relatively poor bird population. Outside the autumn crop, drawing in a brief flush of migrants off the grasslands, they're inhabited permanently by almost no animal beyond occasional wanderers from adjacent forest or grassland environments. The plants are coarse, fibrous, and irritating to the digestive tracts of all but the most specialized herbivores, of which there are still fairly few in regards to birds. And in winter, when the petals fall and the leaves wither, the dried stalks offer little shelter from wind or weather. Among the only permanent residents of any note are various species of large mole crickets, which fill the approximate niches of rodents, nibbling on roots and tubers underground through the hard times, and gathering sizable stores of fallen seeds in subterranean caches when they come available. Unlike most crickets today, Serina species often live several seasons, thus their large sizes, provided they are able to nestle deep enough in the soil to avoid frost in more temperate climates. Even if they are killed in winter slumber, however, most species will have bred by the end of their first summer, leaving their eggs in the dirt to hatch and begin the next generation with the coming of spring. For the few birds that nest in the sunflower barrens, a healthy breeding season depends on the size of the spring hatching and subsequent migration of young mole crickets, which occurs en masse above the ground. The crickets, which hatch at just under a centimeter in length, have evolved to all emerge at once and swamp their predators, with the hopes that a few individuals manage to survive and spread out to new territories successfully in the confusion. With over 95% of hatchlings being taken in the first 2 weeks of the hatching season. Hatching occurs at any time in the spring, following 2 or 3 weeks of steady warm temperatures. But if there has been a poor crop of seeds the prior autumn, many adults may not have been able to take in enough protein to breed, and the following year's hatching will be small or non-existent. But if there has been a poor crop of seeds the prior autumn, many adults may not have been able to take in enough protein to breed, and the following year's hatching will be small or non-existent. In these poor years, which occur often every 10 years or so, many nestling birds, with their eggs incubated intentionally to hatch them out at the same time as the crickets, will starve to death before the next glut of insects, in the form of less hardy beetle larvae and aphids, awaken several weeks later. The sunflowers, though they bloom only for a short 3-week window in midsummer, nevertheless produce so much pollen and nectar at once during this brief flush that entire colonies of a few specialized species of honey ants, an ant clade which have become more or less stingless bees in the absence of the real thing, are able to make a living within the forest, storing up their entire year's worth of food during this time, thanks to workers which are hatched only weeks before the predicted boom, and which die almost immediately after the petals wither, ensuring that they use as little of the precious food as possible after gathering it to feed the queen. Alongside a small number of flightless workers, she will then bide her time until the next summer, with the queen large and immobile in adulthood, doing little more than lying in near dormancy for most of this time, as her housekeepers maintain the integrity of the burrow. Due to the extremely short duration of the food supply and the need to reserve it so meticulously throughout the rest of the year, the queens of species that survive in this habitat only lays eggs twice per year, one series of clutches before the bloom, which will hatch to become the flying food gatherers, and one right after, which consists of fertile drones and new queens, which will gorge on the season's harvest before flying off to mate and settle into their own new colonies, taking with them in specialized baskets upon their hind legs just enough pollen and honey for the female to rely on until the next spring. A surprise lies in store for the males shortly after, whom, after choosing a mate and constructing their first home together in a patch of soft soil, will mate with her only once before being cannibalized and fed upon, his body providing the boost of protein she will need come spring to lay her first clutch of eggs. Stored sugars within subterranean honey ant colonies in the sunflower barrens are among the only rich food source available for animals outside the seeding season, and are occasionally pilfered by opportunistic sweet-toothed birds that pass through the barrens outside of choice season. They are spread out and often difficult to locate, however, and do not make up a significant part of any one creature's diet, with no creature beyond a few other small arthropods, such as the nest parasitic dewdrop beetle, a cuckoo ladybird which favors this species as a host, eating both their eggs as larvae and the sugary food stores as adults, specialized to feed from them. Hey, thank you guys for watching this all the way to the end. This month, I am going back to university, so throughout the rest of this year, you might not get Serina or Pariah's content as fast as you're getting them at the moment. I will do my best, but I wish to put my schooling above all else. Thank you to the 1,000 subscribers that we've gotten here on the channel, and I can't wait to see more. A special thanks to Dylan Beta for allowing me to do this on YouTube in the first place. You guys are all great. Let me know what time period you are hyped for in the comments. If you want to get near real-time updates on the Serina audiobook project, join the Pariah's Discord server in the link below in the comments. Thank you again, and have a good night.